of all the candidates out there, and there are four impressive individuals, just talking specifically about their intellect, many pay attention to who clerked for whom, and you hear the name Antonin Scalia mentioned quite often. Ed Whelan was a former clerk for the Justice, and so, by the way, was Amy Coney Barrett. She clerked for Antonin Scalia as well. She's the only woman on the list that remains right now. So, Ed, what do you think if you had to handicap this bunch? We're told that the more controversial, the less likely, and that Mitch McConnell has said try to avoid controversy, which is why he has settled on Ketledge and Hardiman as easier for approval. What do you make of that?
Well, look, we have four great candidates. Confirmability is certainly a relevant factor. I don't think ease of confirmability is something that people should care that much about. If it takes some work to get a great nominee through, let's get that nominee through. So I think any four of these would be outstanding.
Does it concern you when, let's say, Mitch McConnell is talking that way, and I can understand his job is to get a nominee through, that there's going to be a lot of kabuki theater before all of this, and when all is said and done, it's likely that two Republicans might not vote for this nominee, particularly regarding Roe v. Wade. Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, but that three Democrats up for re-election in red states, one big by Donald Trump, could. So that would be Joe Donnelly of Indiana, Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota, and Joe Manchin of West Virginia. Do you think when all is said and done, that's where the battleground is among those five?
Well, those are five very important senators for the final vote. I actually think that President Trump will have a great opportunity to keep Senator Collins and Senator Murkowski on board, as well as to get three or more red state Democrats on board. Yeah, I think you will see a fight over those senators.
Now, what about the Bush connection here? It's supposed to hurt, we're told, Brett Kavanaugh, who has the longest judicial written record of dissents and opinions that seem to prove his conservative gravitas, but that could work against him because there's almost too many written opinions. And the Bush connection, of course, which might not help you with this president, who doesn't have the best of relationships with the Bush family. What do you think?
Well, look, all of these candidates have Bush connections. It was President Bush, after all, who appointed the three longstanding federal judges to the court. Look, Judge Kavanaugh was very involved in serving conservative legal politics in the conservative legal movement well before President Bush. He's someone who any president would have looked to in his administration. So I don't think that will cut significantly against him.
You know, we're told about trying to, rally the base to whoever the president chooses. That's important. He wanted sort of like the wow factor, which I suppose by those comments he meant to wow the base, wow conservatives. Almost any of these choices, and you know them far better than I, Ed, would serve that purpose. But is there any possibility if you don't get a wow factor, let's say a Kavanaugh name comes up and it's not a wow factor, that they would sit aside or not still push for his approval?
I don't think so. Look, in this pre-nomination phase, it's not surprising that people who favor one candidate would tend to say some negative things about others. I think once we have the nominee and people look closely at the merits of the nominee, the conservatives and Republicans will unify around that nominee.
What is your thought on some Democrats who have talked about waiting until after the midterm election? Let's just take that to the next step. And they did wait until after the midterm election. And ironically, Republicans stand a very good chance of beefing up their numbers in the Senate. Maybe not the House, but certainly in the Senate. Wouldn't that actually help Republicans in that event, that they now have greater numbers and wouldn't have to rely on those Democratic votes?
Oh, I think that's right if that were to happen. Look, this is a desperation tactic on the part of Democrats. They have, caused the Supreme Court filibuster to be abolished. They have no ammunition as a minority, so they're just trying to come up with some means of obstructing this nominee, and I don't think it'll work. If this proceeds as it ought to, the nominee will be a Supreme Court justice by the end of September. Any possibility of fear? I know, and going a little too far here, that this nominee is what the president hopes and thinks, because in the past, a Republican president picking what he thought was a Republican judge didn't end up
being that way. You could even say the same of Justice Kennedy. You could certainly say that about David Souter, appointed by George H.W. Bush. What do you think?
Things are dramatically different these days. Over the last 2 or 3 decades, you've had the rise of the conservative legal movement. You've had law students and judges whose thinking on legal matters has been shaped by Justice Scalia and Justice Thomas. And no one who identifies as a judicial conservative these days is going to be anything like a Justice Souter.
All right. Ed Whelan, thank you very, very much. Very good seeing you.
Thank you.